I'm sure you've heard this a lot, but we are seeing it internally at Red Canary that the role of detection engineering, the classical way that you would typically go about being a detection engineer and the jobs that you do are completely transforming. And I would challenge you all to see how you can figure out how to, augment and improve your detection engineering.
Welcome to Red Canary Office Hours. My name is Alex Spiliotes. I'm a director of product marketing, subbing in for Keith, Brian Donahue. Depending on how many times you've been here, I'm subbing in for someone. But I'm joined today by Jimmy Astle, our director of machine learning, pretty much director of everything AI at Red Canary, and birthday man of the hour.
I
Jimmy,
know, thanks.
happy birthday. I held that one back.
I wouldn't want to be anywhere else on my birthday than on this webinar. So it's exciting, and I somewhat tongue in cheek, but it should be fun. Thanks, Alex, for the awesome intro. Excited to nerd out on some of the concepts that we've been building on in this seminar series.
Love it. For those who've been tuning in, this is the third installment of our AI and the SOC miniseries, from hype to outcomes. Today, we're going to focus on measuring the impact of your AI investments. Hopefully, you've garnered investment. At some point, you're going to have to communicate and thoroughly understand what value it's delivering. We're going to focus on that today. Just the high-level structure of the conversation today. I'll take a beat on the next slide, just to talking about where to start with measuring the impact. Jimmy and I have chatted about it. I've chatted with a lot of Red Canary customers, so I feel like I have a good sense of where to start. And then as we continue the conversation, I'll really pick Jimmy's brain on specific benefits you should expect from a well-introduced AI SOC program. And we'll provide a little bit of metrics and math to kind of quantify and even qualify the impact. So just at a high level to maybe frame the conversation, implementing and incorporating AI into your SecOps is obviously highly technical, but measuring the impact shouldn't be. In order to communicate impact in a way that resonates with your manager, whoever that is, CISO, CIO, the board, you kind of got to keep it translatable. And from chatting with Jimmy and chatting with a lot of our customers, there are really three areas that keep bubbling up when we talk about ways people measure SecOps impact. The first is a reduction in the number of alerts that your humans on your security operations team have to triage. The second is improved quality of investigations, there are a couple parts to that, which we'll talk about. And the third part is happier analysts, like improved day-to-day experience for your security analysts. So with that framing, we can kick it off here. Jimmy, could you talk a little bit about how AI agents can actually reduce the overall volume of alerts that a human analyst has to review?
Yeah, it's a good tee up, Alex. And so in the beginning of this series, the first one of the guys on my team, Raphael, and I gave a really sort of medium deep dive into like how you build these things, how we like to build these things. But I'll summarize it here very quickly. You hear this term AI agents. About 2 years ago, we made a bet on this at Red Canary of how can we use this new technology of an LLM to automate tasks. Yeah, there's all kinds of other types of definitions for agents, but to me, it's really like using LLMs to automate tasks and bolting on some other technologies really means you're having an agent. And these LLMs allow you to do a lot of other things that aren't sort of as procedural. They can be more dynamic. And so essentially what you're doing is you're giving an agent a set of tools inside of your security estate to look up IP addresses. Maybe they're going to go look up a login history. They're going to go pull, do these files normally execute on these endpoints? All of these, you sort of go and build these features and you give them to the AI as actual context, right? And so you're doing this contextual engineering behind the scenes and you're feeding that to an agent that might go in a loop, asking questions to itself, asking questions to you, going and calling tools until it thinks it's come to the right answer. It can then hand that off to an analyst to make a call. As you refine those agents, and we talked about that in our first seminar series here, as you refine those to be more structured workflows, you can get more confident in those AI agents, so you can sort of automatically make decisions over time. But in essence, Alex, it really is sort of how do you automate those rote tasks, those tier one tasks, and give humans that sort of they're really good at creativity and problem solving. So let's have our SOC analysts focus in on that and not all the button clicking and monotonous work, right?
Yeah, Jimmy, I'm curious, as you've kind of been bringing agents more into kind of our default workflows, are you is your team letting the agents kind of run free initially? Obviously not in production, but like first just have a go, see how you solve the problem, or it would solve the problem? Or are you like really from the start applying a rigid, this is how we do things approach?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, Alex. We typically always start with this sort of chatbot based free flow agent. And over the years now, we've built a set of tools that we can sort of, they're compostable. We can reuse them across our agents. So it's a lot easier for us to sort of build that quick agent to see how the models react, how they call different tools, what words might throw them off that we need to do better contextual engineering on, right? And then over time, we can refine that to make them more structured. I think a really good example of that is we just went live about a month or two ago with our Wiz integration, right? So our agents are going into Wiz, they're going into our identity and endpoint data lakes and pulling a bunch of information together. That one we actually built because we have dozens of other agents in production for identity. So we were actually able to take like the core functionality of that, change up some of the tools and some of the instructions the agents are using, and give that sort of initial structured workflow. But for this group, if you're not super familiar with it, it definitely helps to experiment with these agents. You have to get a feel. There's definitely a qualitative piece of building these things where not all the models behave the same, and so you want to kind of feel them out. But as you get more comfortable, as you learn how to describe the value to your leadership of the ROI you're getting, you can start to get better with the structure of these things and make them simpler and more efficient.
Okay, yeah, that's super interesting. And one question, I know from chatting with you and other folks on the SecOps team at Red Canary, like if the agent does a good enough investigation and in simulations and just in reps, it's proven trustworthy over time. Like, does the agent make the decision to like adjudicate the alert and it doesn't make its way to a human for review, or how does that handoff go when you
Yeah,
have like when you get to the point where you have a ton of confidence in the investigation and the primary decision made by the agent?
yeah, our agents do several different types of like terminal states when they're done, right? And a lot of our agents have this thing you'll hear called RLHF, reinforcement learning and human feedback, where you have that human in the loop and we're continuously learning and improving the agents. But I would say, Alex, some of our agents are so structured and deterministic, and we measure them relentlessly that those are going to be, hey, when these certain scenarios are met, we're going to make decisions to publish those threats. Actually, a vast majority of our agents use a combination of machine learning models and traditional heuristics, where we're using like LLMs to do feature extraction, and then we're actually making decisions with your traditional ways that you would write detections. But we have other agents that are actually reasoning and calling tools and inferring customer feedback. And actually, that agent, with its high level of reasoning and agency and tool calling and the context that it builds, it's actually just as good as making those calls, but it takes a lot more care and feeding to bring those to market.
Okay, okay, that's super interesting. Well, just like as you bring agents into your operations and you want to measure the impact, on the bottom right, there's just like a very simple equation you can do. Just look at number of alerts per week your humans were touching and triaging before you had AI agents in the mix, and then after, even if you hold constant the average triage time per alert for your humans, and we'll get to this, you can actually see that go way down if you bring agents in correctly. You'll get a sense of just time saved per week if you need to, garner more investment for your program or even just share your success with the rest of the org. Okay, moving into the business value or impact that agents can have specifically on investigations. Here's a great example. One of our early examples at Red Canary, we have so many now, but I think this is still very illustrative. We had a user at one of our customer organizations log into Salesforce from a new ISP. I think there were other interesting, potentially suspicious elements of the login. It wasn't picked up by the customer's identity product. And our identity investigation agent conducted in 3 minutes an investigation that a human would need 30 to 40 minutes to conduct, right? Exact same processes, quality of approach baked into the agent, the agent workflow, saving, potentially 35 minutes of dwell time or at a minimum response time. So really material improvement to the speed of investigations. Jimmy, could you talk a little bit more about maybe since this detection, how you've built out investigation agents at Red Canary?
Yeah. Yeah, this foundational capabilities in this agent are now very much reused across, the 20 plus agents we have in production. I'll continue to pull that Wiz thread just because it's top of mind and it's something we just shipped. Although Wiz isn't, completely focused on identity, they have a lot of really good findings that come out of the Wiz platform for anomalous logons into systems or cloud resources, even SaaS applications that you can plug in. And so we've been able to sort of take, this same tried and true investigation methodology that's actually developed by our detection engineering team, right? And so we follow the same standard operating procedures that they would do, and we're constantly updating our agents as those SOPs evolve. And in this case, we had to develop a new one for Wiz, right? But in that case, it might say, hey, Wiz has an investigative finding for a weird logon and a weird file hash on an EC2 instance, right? And so we're able to sort of take a lot of those detection heuristics for, well, that we've never seen that ISP before, interacting with an EC2 instance, and the geolocation we've never seen before for that user, and the time of day that it happened we've never seen before. These are all like foundational analytic services that feed our our agents' decisions, right? And then from that, we engineer all these features, and then we make decisions on those features, right? And that's this sort of pattern that we continue to apply over and over and over again. And it shouldn't be a surprise, right? A lot of security operations are these very sort of tried and true processes that you just need to follow to get to a point where, do I need to make a decision? Do I need to call in the cavalry? Do I need to respond? That kind of thing.
Yeah. And so it's interesting. I know I would have conceived, not being a data scientist, that like you could create an identity investigation agent and it would, if done well, it could conduct kind of the same quality of investigation product to product, at least within a specific domain, right? It's like, I would have thought,
That's
like,
right.
okay, Red Canary is going to have the identity investigation agent, and then it'll have a cloud one, endpoint one, network, et cetera. But we've learned that it doesn't quite work like that, right? Like product, like very narrowly scoped agent, or should I say, you're better off having more narrowly scoped agents than a few more autonomous, broader ones, right? Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah, that's a fantastic way to tee that up, Alex. You know, I sort of think about it like in the early days of software engineering, where you had assembly compilers, then you had your sort of coding languages on top of that, and then you had GUIs and abstraction layers, right? We're so early in this agentic era, right, across various industries, that you should focus on those like foundational building blocks and pillars. And we found that although you can build a general purpose security operations agent that's pretty good at generically investigating most things, as a company that just focuses on MDR, high quality investigations, detecting things that other products might not, our agents, we found, needed to start to be tailored to the various security products, because not all security products have the same signal coming out of them. Not all security products interpret data the same way. And a lot of them use different terminology for the same concepts, but you have to train the agents. And I'm not saying fine tune LLMs, but you have to craft instructions for those agents that so that they understand what the various terminology across these security products mean. It's a very subtle nuance, but you will see accuracy and consistency go upwards of 10, 15, 20% in your agent experiments. Actually, we're experimenting with some new agents right now. And just that, I just made a few tweaks to one of our agents, and the accuracy went up by 15% just by changing a few words and describing the data that that agent is receiving to interpret in a much more verbose, tailored way to that security platform.
Okay. And curious, Jimmy, so when it let's say it doesn't go haywire, but when the agents start making errors, what does that look
Yeah.
like? Like, yeah, can you, yeah, give me the play-by-play of like, can you see the reasoning? Do you
Yeah.
analyze it retroactively?
So,
How does it go?
so one of the most important fundamental building blocks to building agents is making sure that you have good tracing, making sure that you have good evaluations in place so that you can instrument these agent loops and agent workflows and really understand where something is happening, the output at every stage of what's going on, being able to tweak those things, being able to save those as data sets so you can back test and replay when you're changing models or instructions and understanding how it might affect previously investigated incidents. And so typically what we see is the agents will make a mistake in calling a tool, right? So one thing, everybody thinks about building these LLMs. One of the core, these agents, one of the core things to building them is having the LLM call a tool external to it to, get a much more accurate answer. That could be a Google search, that could be a virus total lookup, that could be a reputation lookup to an internet service provider, prevalence index, that sort of thing, right? And when those tool calls happens, an LLM internally is fine-tuned to say, hey, you're going to have tools. You describe what the tool does, what the output is. And sometimes the LLMs might get too many tools. Their context window, meaning like the window in which they are able to make decisions, might lose some of that context, and therefore they're going to call the wrong tool. It would be like, Alex, say you're a mechanic and you need a socket wrench, and you're like, all right, give me a socket wrench, assistant. And the socket wrench comes back and gives you a screwdriver. And you're like, well, I guess I could turn that around and hammer it in or use that, but I really need the socket wrench. And then, of course, when you have the wrong tool for the job, sort of everything else around it falls apart.
Yeah. Okay. Super interesting. Well, so when you get to a point where you're getting the same benefits and clear material impact out of agents in your investigations that we are, just like basic math again is looking at how much time are your people spending on investigations before and after using AI, and are they kind of building on what we talked about earlier? Are they having to triage and investigate fewer alerts because the quality of agent investigation is shunting false positives kind of away from your people? So doesn't have to be more fancy than that. But yeah, easy way to understand and communicate
And
impact.
and Alex, one point I really want to make, like in the data science world, if you improve efficiency by like 3, 5, 7%, that's a significant increase. Don't think that like, oh, you put it in there and you only got, 7% efficiency. I was shooting for 40. But the key to this is those 3, 5, 7% improvements, when you stack those up, because there's hundreds of processes in a SOC, that's where you get that cumulative effect, that snowball effect of really having the efficiencies realized inside of your team.
Yeah, that's a great point. You don't need 90% faster investigations,
Correct.
right? Like 10 is pretty fantastic.
Exactly.
Okay, and next one. This was super cool, Jimmy. I remember seeing this on your webinar with Raphael last week. So I think this is on top the performance of our phishing triage agent at a little bit more of an earlier, more autonomous stage, and then based on some improvements you made, the performance afterwards is on the bottom. Could you kind of walk the attendees through what's kind of going on here?
Yeah, so kudos to my teammate Raphael. He built out like a mock agent for the webinar that was focused on triaging an email. Is it a fish or not a fish, right? And so we have a variation of this running internally across our customer base for managed phishing. And one of the things that you might not think about that's a lot different with AI agents versus like traditional even ML or detection engineering with heuristics, decision trees, that kind of thing, is because of the nature of LLMs, they are probabilistic, meaning they're random. If I ask the LLM the same question 10 times, I will get roughly the same answer probably 9 times, but one time it's going to be completely off base, right? It might be somewhat close, but it's just going to be totally different. And that is the fundamental nature of this technology. And one of the hardest parts about building these agents is taming that autonomy and the consistency. And you might say consistency, I just care about accuracy. But there's this consistency dimension where, because of that probabilistic nature, a lot of what you're doing behind the scenes with these agents is that context engineering to make sure it always has the sort of right data to make the right answer. So it's way more consistent. Yeah, it might, not be as accurate because it just doesn't have the right data, the right decision making, but at least it's consistent in those decisions, right? And so we literally just talked about this in the previous slide, right? As the trick to building these things. The magic really is when you build them and you give these autonomous actions and you're doing the tracings and evaluations, you need to be able to understand, what did I just tweak on this thing to make that consistency go through the roof? Oh, it was that one word, or I brought in a little bit more context, or I called this extra tool and I could see it in my traces. And now the agent, just improved to a point where I'm comfortable with going to the next sort of release stage, right?
Yeah, the consistency thing's so interesting. I mean, we've said at Red Canary, like, treat your agents like they're employees. And I just think about, I'm an employee, a teammate who gives me best in class work sometimes and just kind of junk other times is not someone I want to work with, actually. You like
Yes.
the consistency really does matter for such a process and obviously operations focused job like SecOps. So could you talk a little bit, like, what changes did Raphael make to improve the outcome here? Like, I see on the top right, the first simulation, the agent was accurate 87% of the time and only consistent like under 2/3 of the time, but kind of got the numbers
Yeah.
up the second go.
And another shout out for our webinar to go check it out, because we nerd out in much more detail there. But some really good examples are, when you build these agents and you give them all these tools and you let them figure things out on their own, it sounds really cool, right? But the reality is I don't need an agent to reason on a phishing email, look at the sender of the email, and then do more inference in reasoning and say, I should go look up and see if that's a malicious sender. And then it calls the tool to go do that. And then it comes back and says it's a malicious sender. And then it reasons some more and then makes a decision. You're talking about 5 round trip calls to a cloud, 3 or 4 different tool calls. And every single one of those things is more probabilistic variability on whether or not that consistency and accuracy stays the same. And so some of the tricks that you start to learn over time is that, well, I don't need an LLM to extract the sender of an email and go look that up in a reputation database. I can just have regular code doing that, and I can exit early before I get into the meat of the autonomy that the agent's given. So, in the machine learning world, we would sort of have these like pre-filters to machine learning models. Like, you don't want to feed everything to your ML models, right? You want to have a bunch of different filters and gates in front of it, knowing you're sort of qualifying the security data before it gets to like the meat of the decision making process. And that's one of the big tricks when you're doing this agent engineering, is trying to figure out what are those shortcuts and what are those like smoking gun type things that you can quickly escape out of some of those investigation paths that the agent would take. Other parts of it would be maybe making sure that when an LLM call happens, that it's getting the exact right data. And so standardizing data, making sure that data is reliable, making sure you can query it in a cost-effective and fast way to get the most accurate responses back, right? And so it's a science and an art, honestly, of learning how these behaviors, like, AI agents aren't a static system, right? You don't read how an AI agent works by just looking at the source code. You actually have to instrument it and look at how it thinks and reasons, because every task you give it, it could be the same agent in code, but it could make a completely different decision, right? And this goes back to your point about keeping it narrowly scoped, building narrow purpose agents, because when you do that, it really helps drive in this trifecta of efficiencies that we just went over.
Yeah, I love the comment from Brett. 60% of the time, it works every time, right?
Exactly, Brett. That
Um,
I will be very truthful and honest that a lot of folks will say, like, because there's so much hype around this technology, and trust me, I'm as bullish as anyone. But remember, like, to Brett's point, if you just throw AI at a problem, you're going to have more problems. Kind of like the old saying of, like, ooh, I have a problem with this regex. I know, I'll add more regex, and now I have two problems, right? Like, it's a bad nerdy joke to make.
Awesome. Okay, and our last kind of beat here. Also, I encourage you, if you have questions, we'd love to get to them at the end. Like, keep them coming in the chat. We'll take a look when we're done. But last kind of point is that, so yeah, building on what we've already talked about, if you can reduce the number of alerts your people have to review, if the quality of investigation that gets to your people is good enough that they're spending less time doing follow-on investigation and response, you're going to have happier people, right? It's what we've talked about is agents following pretty rote processes that now, hopefully, your people don't have to. So, you know, on the left is a quote from one of our detection engineers. We're investigating 10x the number of leads that we did before bringing agents kind of into our workflows. And yeah, I guess Jimmy, we just were talking about yesterday, like we hadn't chatted about this, that agents are fundamentally changing the way detection engineering is working at Red Canary. Could you provide
Yeah,
a little bit of insight into that?
yeah, Alex. I'm sure you've heard this a lot, but we are seeing it internally at Red Canary that the role of detection engineering, the classical way that you would typically go about being a detection engineer and the jobs that you do, are completely transforming. And I would challenge you all to see how you can figure out how to, augment and improve your detection engineering processes. And let me give you a few examples. So we've built some model context protocol MCP services internally that provide tools to our agents. We have agents that go out and like chatbots for our detection engineers, internal obviously, where they can say, show me the noisiest detectors today, right? And the AI is going to reason and say, oh, I need to go call these tools. And it comes back and gives a ton of analysis. And it says, based on these queries that I ran and the statistics that I'm seeing, here are the top 10 noisiest detectors today. And here's the last time it was tuned and who did it. And you're like, cool. And then you could ask it, can you help me give me some suggestions on how to do that? And it's going to go through and do a bunch of analysis and give you some really good concrete outcomes. I would say that LLMs aren't good enough to autonomously go off and tune things because they almost get too literal in how they're doing it. You really need the human creativity still there, but you're doing 90% of the busy work of detection engineering. And then you're sort of teeing up this like perfectly told story of here's this really noisy thing. Here's why it's really noisy. Here's how I think we should go about tuning it. And here's the impact that I think it would have. Hey, human, can you help me validate this thing for me and go forward, right? And that's like a really good example of how we're seeing it change. And it's changed so much actually. Internal at Red Canary, we have a brand new detection engineering team. They're called DAEs, or detection automation engineers. And Alex, what do you think their whole role is to do as a detection automation engineer?
They're automating. Yeah.
Yes, that's right, right. And so, yeah, it's definitely changing before our eyes. And by the end of this year, you'll see some significant changes, I would bet, in a lot of your security programs for folks on this call, realizing the benefits of this technology.
So before, Jimmy, before like LLMs and agents were used to kind of bubble up that information, like what would a DE have to do? Like, they'd
Yeah,
have to play doctor, basically, find the problem, diagnose, like, yeah,
it's
could you try to run
it's
us
a
down?
lot of knowledge worker tradecraft. Like I think of it almost like a trade in a way, where like sit down with the senior person, ask them what Splunk queries they're running, and ask them in that one specific scenario what that magical tweak was that they made to show like the four other things, and then interpreting those Splunk queries to figure out, okay, which actual detection analytics are these? All right, now let me go study the detection analytics to understand the impact. And then, cool, now that I understand it, I'm going to change it. But as we all know, you don't just go change a detection that's been in production for months or years, because you have no idea if you're now missing threats because of the way you tuned it, or you're going to introduce even more false positives. So you need to go back test. And it's this very structured yet sort of dynamic process of looking over the accuracy of your detections and tuning them. And it's like that one's much more of an art than a science, I would say. And it's highly dependent on these sort of super specialized, super smart nerds that are out there studying and understand their detection corpus. And some of our DEs can look at a detection and instantly know where in the code to go, how long it's been there, right? And so how do you harness those super smart people to bring that knowledge and extend it to other areas and help automating some of the more rote tasks that they're doing, right? That's the magic.
Yeah, oh, I love it. We're at the half hour, just a little bit more to go. So if you want to measure the benefits of kind of this step-by-step improvement to your operations, look at your annual Gallup survey if you do that at your company. Like I know when prospective customers are evaluating Red Canary, they ask like, what is your retention of your SOC analyst team, right? They want consistency, as we've talked about. So you can look at retention, but also sentiment, right? We track function by function, like quality of life at Red Canary, and you very well may see material improvements to your SecOps team's reported sentiment, right? So just keep an eye out for that. You also run your own surveys, of course, but yeah, in addition to getting qualitative quotes, like you can put numbers on these benefits as well. So that is about it. I think, yeah, stay on for a second or another minute for any questions that come in. But just for everyone's awareness, please come by next week for the last installment of this, where Keith McCammon, our Chief Security Officer, and Mary Ritz, our VP of Product Management, are going to talk build versus buy for AI in the SOC. And yeah, if you want more AI specific content, I mean, yeah, Jimmy's got a ton of blogs. We've had other conversations over the past couple of years. There's a ton of really technical information. Like this was pretty much just the tip of the iceberg. But yeah, come on over to redcanary.com. We can definitely help you out.
Good stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy, and thanks everyone. Really appreciate the time today.
Likewise.